Hello and welcome. Are all nuclear states equal? The US, Russia, the UK, France and China are all part of a nuclear club, and 3 other states have openly tested nuclear weapons. But one nation, Israel, refuses to confirm or deny its nuclear capabilities. It's one of the worst kept military secrets in the world. Israel has not only developed nuclear energy, it has a significant nuclear arsenal and the capability to deliver it. Officially, the country pursues a policy of nuclear ambiguity or nuclear opacity, a sort of don't ask, don't tell. Whenever the US raises its concerns about global nuclear proliferation, Israel is not mentioned, a policy dating back to 1969's White House meeting between then US President Richard Nixon and Israeli Prime Minister Gottemoeller. The shroud of secrecy surrounding Israel's weaponry hasn't stopped that country or the US from doggedly pressuring other nations like Iran and Syria over their nuclear ambitions. Experts and activists argue that the policy is a dangerous double standard which makes it impossible to stem the tide of nuclear proliferation in the Middle East or anywhere else. On today's show, we ask, what will it take for Israel to bring its nuclear program out of the shadows, and could it pave the way for a nuclear-free Middle East? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. Log on to livestation.com/AJE, enter the chat room and take part, and we'll also welcome your phone calls onto the show as well. And joining me from Tel Aviv is Gideon Spera, a journalist and activist who was the founder of Yesh Gvul peace movement and the Israeli Committee for Mordechai Vanunu and for a Middle East free of atomic, chemical and biological weapons. Here in Washington, D.C., I'm joined by writer, historian and senior research fellow at the National Security Archive, Dr. Avner Cohen. He's the author of Israel and the Bomb, which chronicles Israel's nuclear program. And also in the studio with me is Dr. Richard Weitz, a senior fellow and director of the Center for Political Military Analysis at the Hudson Institute, where he focuses on issues of non-proliferation and weapons of mass destruction. Gentlemen, I welcome you all to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Dr. Cohen, if I could start with you, sir, and ask, everyone knows Israel has nuclear weapons, so why continue with the don't ask, don't tell policy? What's the rationale?
Well, I think the rationale has been valid politically, strategically, long time ago. As your promo started, it was a deal done 40 years ago, almost to the day. 26th of September 1969 between Gottemoeller and Richard Nixon. In my new book, I'm going to tell quite a great deal new information about it that I've recently discovered. So there is an agreement between the 2 states that the issue should be left untouched publicly. Don't ask, don't tell. But I think the time has come for both countries as well as others to put Israel within the recognized nuclear weapon states. And I think, like all of them have the obligation to go to a world without nuclear weapons, Israel should be treated as one of them.
Dr. Cohen, let me ask you just briefly, what's actually known about what Israel possesses in terms of its striking capacity?
Well, nothing is known in a very authoritative fashion. Based or interpreted on the data that Vanunu provided, there are all sorts of speculations, from lower as about 80 warheads to higher numbers, could be 200 and more. So it's roughly considered by so-called experts like myself, none of us has a full knowledge, authoritative knowledge, somewhere between 1 to 200.
Dr. Richard Weitz, good to have you with us as well, sir.
Thank you.
For years, the US has stood by this policy for Israel's nuclear ambiguity and shielded it from criticism and scrutiny. And it's something that comes up a lot. We have a lot of viewers asking, why is that the case? What is the goal of the US doing that?
Well, the U.S. position has been sort of this don't ask, don't tell. The Israelis agreed not to test a nuclear device, not to say they have nuclear weapons, not even to use them for diplomatic influence. And the reason why the United States wanted that strategy in return for not publicly objecting to Israel's nuclear deterrent is that it was seen that in one way it could help the peace process, because the assumption has been that if you want to get the Israelis to be accommodating on territory or other issues, you've got to make them feel very secure. And traditionally with Japan or Germany, we would put U.S. troops in the country, we would give them extended security guarantees. But in the case of Israel, it wasn't seen as sufficiently credible. So the idea is you'd let them have their own nuclear weapons, and that would make it a more accommodating.
Well, I would add one more thing. Israel has never, in my view, maybe a mistake, but Israel has never thought to ask, to seek for legitimacy for its nuclear weapons. Ever since the very beginning, Israel took a very ambivalent attitude towards that. It was hard on the side of resolve and action. It was very hesitant on the declaratory side, on the threatening side, on the deterrent side. So Israel took a very unique compromise of its own. So it's not so much it was an American demand, but Israel actually has never asked to put it on the table. In 1969, just to finish this line, the United States was in position that Israel already had the bomb. So the question was what to do about it. Essentially, they adopted a line that Yitzhak Rabin's ambassador used it before, a few months earlier, that is to say that Israel is not going to make any step, any activity that will take it from the privacy to the public world, demonstration, test, or anything like that.
Well, Dr. White, so let me just get back to your your point, I should say, on the sort of deterrent factor that Israel would have. Couldn't it also be seen as counterproductive in the fact that it has the capacity with such force to strike any Arab capital and to strike Tehran, to have these nuclear weapons bang in the middle of this region that's potentially so volatile?
That has always been the fear, but historically it hasn't had that effect. The Arab governments have called for a world free of nuclear weapons of mass destruction. And you could argue at least it's encouraging some of them to consider chemical weapons, for example. But in the nuclear era, they didn't seem to be to go an extent of actually trying to match it. Now, an exception occurred with Iraq a couple decades ago, and then we had the Israeli strike. And Syria recently may have been moving in that direction, so you had again an Israeli airstrike. The problem they're facing now, it's a bit different. Iran, it's a much more harder means to deal with. But again, a lot of people are not sure if Israel were to give up its nuclear weapons, whether that would cause Iran to make more clear its policy of restraint, because it might be other things that are driving the Iranian nuclear program, particularly concern about the United States.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me bring in Gideon Spera. Good to have you in Tel Aviv there, Mr. Spera. Let me ask you about what's been going on. And just in the past few months, a senior State Department official spoke openly about Israel as a country with nuclear arms and included it with other nuclear countries it wanted to see abide by the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Now, is the Obama administration, do you believe, as likely to be as patient and as tolerant as previous U.S. administrations in shielding or even tolerating the sort of quiet approach to Israel's nuclear capacity?
Yeah, it is well known that Israel is a nuclear power, and Israel introduced the nuclear race into the Middle East. And the Israeli policy of monopoly of nuclear weapons cannot be held for eternity. It's only a question of time until every other country in the region will have nuclear weapon if Israel won't be stripped from its nuclear capacity. We know that Israel has hundreds of nuclear warheads ready to be launched every moment. We know that Israel has nuclear weapons in its submarines. We know from foreign press that Israel planted nuclear mines on the Golan Heights. Israel is a very dangerous place from this point of view. And if we want to have a free zone in the Middle East, we have to start with Israel, not with Iran. It is very desirable that no one will have nuclear weapons. Of course, Iran as well, but Israel started with it, introduced the nuclear race. And I think that if Obama is serious with his plan for a world free of nuclear weapons, I think he has to deal with Israel the same aggressive way that he is dealing with Iran.
Mr. Spera, let me ask you one thing then. How effectively do you think the U.S. Can create incentives for the Arab world and for Iran if it can get Israel to talk about its nuclear capacity and to admit that it has the weapons and take part in the non-proliferation treaty?
We know that Israel is from a lot of aspects the 52nd or 51st state of the United States. If the United States is serious about the nuclear-free world and Middle East free zone, then of course it had the power to force Israel to open its Gottemoeller reactor for international inspection, to open all nuclear sites for international inspection, to start a process of building a free zone in the Middle East. If the United States is serious. Until now, Israel was treated preferably, and they closed an eye with its nuclear arsenal.
Okay.
United States as well as Europe. And I think it is high time to stop it and to deal with Israel in the same way you are dealing with every country which is desired to have nuclear weapons.
Okay, let's get a call in from, we have China on the line.
Israel,
Good to hear
don't
from,
forget that
Mr. Spera, hang on, bear with me 1 second. We have a caller on the line from China. It's good to hear from China. Malana, if we can get your question in, please.
Yes. Israel is not a dangerous country in this world with their secret atomic weapons. Why United States is silent for this?
Okay, actually, perhaps, Dr. Cohen, I can put this to you. I think our caller was trying to say basically Israel is not a dangerous state having nuclear weapons. Why would the US want to shield it from any kind of scrutiny anyway?
Well, I agree. I think that Israel actually has a very good, in this area, credentials in terms of being responsible, being cautious. Even its very tough moments during the 73 war, Israel did not even use nuclear weapons for demonstration, let alone to use it actually against the hostilities. So Israel has a good credentials in this area, and Israel is no different, in my view, than France, the United Kingdom, and the United States. I would like to see, indeed, over time, trend towards nuclear weapons-free world. It will take a long time. I don't think it will happen in my lifetime, and I think Israel should be part of that. But I don't see any real difference between Israel and the United States or the UK or France. So I agree with the questioner. I agree with the caller.
Dr. White, I thought that the International Atomic Energy Agency's Dr. El Baradei thought he'd made some progress on getting Israel to consider talking about its nuclear arsenal as part of a more comprehensive peace deal prospect. What chance do you feel there is that the US could persuade Israel to relinquish its nuclear capability as part of a regional peace deal, that it could actually persuade it, look, here's a chance to actually make some progress?
Well, that's a very good question, because the current Assistant Secretary who's responsible for our negotiations with both Russia and some of the other nuclear areas, Gottemoeller, actually was a co-author of a 2005 study here at Carnegie, which laid out that very path, that you could expect Israel perhaps to give up its nuclear weapons or somehow regulate its status, but it would have to be in the context of a larger framework. So you would expect other countries in the region to refrain from sensitive nuclear activities. You would get the countries to give up all kinds of weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons, and so on, and then there'd be a comprehensive peace agreement. And so that is the current administration's policy, that you're not, they raise the issue, but they're not going to directly try and force Israel to give us nuclear weapons now. In the context of comprehensive settlement, it could be something that Israel could offer to help further that process.
Interesting you mentioned that. As we take a break, let me just quote to our viewers what Rose Gottemoeller said. She's now the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau for Verification, Compliance and Implementation. She said, instead of defensively trying to ignore Israel's nuclear status, the United States and Israel should proactively call for regional dialogue to specify the conditions necessary to achieve a zone free of nuclear, chemical and biological weapons. Now we're going to take a short break here. As we take this break, let me remind you, you can join the conversation with your questions and comments by logging on to livestation.com and entering the chat room. There's a debate taking place in there right now. We're also taking a poll in there asking, what happens if Israel brings its nuclear arms program out into the open? Let us know what you think based on the options there. We'll be right back.
Don't